Hello, everybody. As most of you know, I'm Geoff Cowan, the former dean and the director of the Annenberg's Center on Communication Leadership and Policy here. We're delighted to be able to present the Loper Lecture on behalf of the school. This is actually the fifth time that we've presented the Loper Lecture at USC, and it's been a compelling series of presentations we put on during that time from top leaders in public service broadcasting. The first year, our speaker was Mary Bitterman, and some of you were here at the time. She was the president of PBS, and of course she had been the general manager and head of KQED in San Francisco. Bill Kling from Minnesota Public Radio and American Public Media was our second speaker. Then we had Bill Baker from WNET, and last year we had C-SPAN's Brian Lamb. It's been a very distinguished lineup, and now we're really proud to have and delighted to have David Fanning, but don't hold your applause because we're going to be talking more about David in a minute. The series would not be possible without two individuals who are with us today. The first is Russell Smith. Russ really is the extraordinary force behind this program. He's a businessman, he's a philanthropist, he's a friend of ours, of the schools, and of Jim Loper's, and please join me in thanking Russell Smith. We established this program a couple of years ago as a tribute to a legendary leader in public service broadcasting, a USC alum, a member of our faculty, and a man who really has been a visionary in so many ways. Please join me in welcoming the honorary chair and namesake, we had a hard time thinking of the name for the series, of the James L. Loper series, Jim Loper, who's here with us. And I also want to take a moment to recognize people in the audience, and it may be that a few people I recognize aren't here. So if you're not here, and if you know somebody's not here, put your hand up to pretend you're that person. Okay? But some I know are here. From the USC Board of Trustees and the Annenberg Board of Counselors, and also from the Board of the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, that great entertainment lawyer and visionary, Bruce Raymer. I don't know if Louise is here yet, but there she is, and Louise is making sure we can be heard in the back. A member of our Board of Counselors, and who was at one time, as Bruce was, the president of KCT here in Los Angeles, a member of the KPCC Board, Louise Bryson. Michael Jackson, who's USC's Vice President for Student Affairs, and anyone who doesn't know him should get to know Michael Jackson. From our own school, Geneva Overholzer, the director of USC Annenberg School of Journalism. And sitting next to her, Larry Gross, who's the director of USC Annenberg's School of Communication. Brenda Barnes, and I feel like Brenda's had one of those great sagas, who's the general manager of KUSC, which is now the most listened to public radio station in the country. Welcome, Brenda Barnes. And congratulations. Mel Rogers, president and general manager of KOCE, is Mel here? Well, he will be. Somebody can pretend to be him in the interim. And Mayor Mazer and Noreen Huang from KCT, are they both here? Thank you very much. And somebody else who will be with us later, I don't see her yet, is the award-winning broadcast journalist, former CPB board member, and USC journalism teacher, Heidi Schulman. And finally, Emmy award-winning documentary producer, Renata Simone. Where is she? There's Renata. She's over there. She's everywhere. Who happens also to be David Fanning's wife. So great to have you here. Before David's lecture, we want to celebrate a terrific new development at the Annenberg School. We're extremely fortunate to have as our dean a visionary leader who understands the power of media to serve and inform the public. In addition to his academic responsibilities, Ernest Wilson is the longest-serving member of the board of the Corporation for Public Broadcasting. He was appointed by President Clinton in 1999, and showing the bipartisanship of this enterprise, reappointed by President George W. Bush in 2004. Just a few weeks ago, Dean Wilson was elected as the chair of the board of CPB, which of course is the congressionally chartered nonprofit that provides the most significant single source of funding for public service media. As a former dean, and a current member of our faculty, I want to underscore how helpful it is for us to have Dean Wilson performing this role. Through this position, Dean Wilson is able to increase both the visibility and the impact of the school among policymakers, journalists, and the public media community, while also being able to create programs of national and international significance. Please join me in welcoming our Dean and the Chairman of the Board of CPB, Ernest Wilson.
Good afternoon, everyone. It's good to see so many friendly faces in the audience, some of whom I think I've spent the last week and a half. I think Bruce and I were together for about, a month and a half, just last couple of days.
A year to me.
We went to a wonderful conference organized by Minnesota Public Radio on the future of local news, and it drew together some of the most thoughtful people in the country. Louise was also at that meeting, and it really was, I thought, a milestone in the ability of the public service media, public broadcasters to come together. But I do want to thank Geoffrey Cowan for all his generosity in the introduction, in the transition from his deanship to my deanship. He's been a great friend and a great mentor. Some of you may not know that we also share another guilt by association opportunity. Geoffrey was also on the board for the Corporation for Public Broadcasting. I spoke with Sharon Rockefeller recently, and she said, I remember that board. It was a contentious board, but that Jeff Cowan, he really led the way. And
Not in contention.
Not in contention. No. That was left for my board to do that when we had some very rough moments, as some of you may know, with the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, but it's now we're in very smooth waters, and it's moving ahead. I do want to say that we are at a unique moment in public service media, what I like to call a 1967 moment. And it's a 1967 moment because that was the year when President Johnson signed into law the bill creating public broadcasting. At that time, the stars were aligned. The Hill, the presidency, the stations, etc., were all very supportive of public service media. We had no natural enemies. We've reached a similar point today. The White House, the Hill, the great foundations, the Ford Foundation, the Rockefeller Foundation, they're all involved. Annenberg has been involved in support of public service media. So we're at that moment again. So the question, ladies and gentlemen, that I think we ought to think about, those of all of us who are concerned about this, is what can we do now that will take public media to the next level? And these are the kinds of conversations that we are having. Let me close by simply saying that the Annenberg School for Communication and Journalism, I want to underscore the and journalism. Some of you may not know that the school was recently renamed from the Annenberg School for Communication to the Annenberg School for Communication and Journalism. And we did that because we deeply, deeply believe in the role of journalism in today's society. And this is a role that we believe public broadcasting can uniquely help to advance. With the decline of a lot of the local newspapers, there is a hole there, there is a gap, and I think more and more people around the country are recognizing that public service media, the public service media that we celebrate through these lectures, can step forward and fill in that gap. And this is something that the Annenberg School wants to contribute to. We have Judy Muller and others in the audience who are active already in public service media. Like a number of you, Bruce and I have had this conversation, we're now starting to calls at the Annenberg School from public broadcasters, possible investors, newspaper broadcasters, etc., saying, we want to partner with you at Annenberg to help to create the media of the future. Because without a strong press, independent media, then democracy will be weaker. And so this is a wonderful time to be the dean. I have to say, by the way, that several people have come up and said, well, what, are you spending 6 days a week in Washington and 1 day a week? I said, no, it's a part-time gig. It's meet 4 times a year, and so I'm back and forth, but most of the time here. But the lecture that we'll hear today comes from a good friend, David Fanning, who was a leader in his own right in trying to think through the possibilities and move beyond the constraints between television and radio and new platforms, and is a mature and innovative and forceful voice in quality production in the public interest. So I want to say thanks to Jeff for recognizing my election. I want to thank all of you in the room for coming today. And if you have any complaints or concerns, suggestions, praise for public service media, please let me know, and I will forward it on to the people who actually do all the good work at NPR and PBS and CPB. Thank you very much.
My own view is this: at least in this area, I'm glad there's a public option. By the way, if you look here, you'll see that and journalism that Ernie talked about, and I think that makes it a particularly perfect moment to introduce one of the great journalists of our time. David Fanning began his filmmaking career as a young journalist in South Africa and produced early films that dealt with race and religion in his troubled homeland for BBC TV. In 1973, he arrived at the U.S. and began producing for KOC. Has Mel arrived yet? Yes, Mel, thank you. Recognize that connection.
Sadly, David doesn't still work for us.
But you're able to still run his material, so there's still that connection. 4 years later, David moved to WGBH in Boston to start the international documentary series, The World. And in just 5 years, he produced and presented more than 50 films for PBS. In a fortunate twist of history, as Ernie mentioned, I was on the board of the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, and while on the CP board in 1982, we made the decision to fund the development of Frontline. We knew that it would be a great series. We knew it would be an important series, but we could never have imagined the way in which David and his team would carry it forward during these 27 years to make it really one of the most indispensable sources of news and information in the country. Today, Frontline remains the longest-running investigative documentary series. 27 series, 530 different episodes and films. The series has won 41 Emmys, 23 Columbia DuPont Awards, 13 Peabody Awards, and 10 Robert F. Kennedy Journalism Awards. Frontline has been at the forefront of the use of new media, and it has one of the richest websites for broadcast journalism. And if you don't go there in addition to watching the shows, I urge you to do so, because it's an entirely other rich thing, which actually one time we based a part of that rich production for the web here at the Annenberg School. During this past summer, Frontline became a leader in converged journalism by partnering with upstart news site Tehran Bureau to provide financing, hosting, and editorial support. Frontline and Tehran Bureau worked together on A Death in Tehran, the Frontline episode that aired this week about the death of Nida Aga Sultan. By another twist of history, and a nice twist of history, the nephew of Russell Smith, who founded this program, of course, Martin Smith, is a top Frontline producer who presented the acclaimed film Obama's War just last month. And I have to also say that Martin's sister is here, and it was Martin's father who was the chairman of the board of KCT when it went on the air with Jim Loper. Is that correct? So that's another wonderful connection that we have with David Fanning and with Frontline. David's brought clips from that program to share with his talk. But first, let's take a look at the last 25 years of Frontline.
Turn the lights down.
In the early 1980s, America was just coming out of a devastating recession. Ronald Reagan was president. A secret war was being played out in Central America. AIDS was about to emerge as the new plague, and a terrorist bombing of a Marine barracks in Beirut would put America on warning. Like now, it was a serious world, and public television responded with a new documentary series.
From the very beginning, the idea was really to try to grab hold of the best of narrative documentary, of finding that connection between journalism and filmmaking. It always set its sights as being a series about ideas, but that at the heart of those ideas there would have to be stories.
You communist son of a bitch, you asked for the Klan, here we are.
There have been times that I've thought, how can you murder your own child? If the decision's wrong, if we're playing God, then I'll have to live with that, and I'm willing to.
One of the birds went down, one of the choppers went down. We got ambushed right there on that intersection.
The volume of fire was just so intense that I don't know how any of us made it out alive.
More than 500 films and countless awards later, Frontline is the only place on television to consistently, week in and week out, take the long, hard view of the day's tough subjects.
The series has turned into a record of the last 25 years. It has been, in the best sense of journalism, as the first draft of history, archiving, in effect, foreign policy bungles, domestic tensions, cultural upheavals, and miscarriages of justice.
We, the jury, find the defendant guilty of first-degree sexual offense.
I wanted to just scream at them. You're wrong. He's not guilty.
Much of television is about making disposable television. What we try to do is make television that lasts. Television that says, we respect your intelligence. We respect your curiosity. We respect that you value ideas as much as we do.
This will be a monumental struggle of good versus evil.
9/11 was a story that we've been covering for almost 20 years, back into the 1980s, and the first war on terrorism. We were, over those weeks after 9/11, using the best of our producers, their knowledge and their experience, and the institutional memory of the series in service of a collection of films that would become tremendously valuable in the weeks immediately after 9/11.
The first weekend after the attacks of September 11th, some people at Camp David were arguing that the war against terrorism should include Saddam Hussein.
Frontline has gone on to devote over 40 hours of documentaries to the struggles that followed.
Are you okay? Garcia!
On the ground in Iraq.
Got hit, came back up, mortally wounded. He went out fighting, and he died like he should.
In the offices of power back in Washington.
There's a war going on inside the administration. They don't even agree what they're doing in Iraq.
And in search of Al-Qaeda in the remotest regions of Afghanistan and Pakistan.
The situation in Afghanistan is more dire than we've seen publicly portrayed.
It has been a commitment to the most important story in our country's recent history. Frontline has any legacy, it's about saying we can take on difficult, tough subjects, do them smartly and thoughtfully, and we can live up to the promise of television. If we give up on the idea of doing these kinds of films, then we give up on the idea of this medium in the best of what it can be.
me just erect my structure here. Thank you, Jeff Cowan, Dean Wilson, for your kind words, and especially for your invitation to come here to the Annenberg School to give the annual Loper lecture. This also gives me a chance publicly to thank Jim Loper for the years of work he gave not just to KCET, but as a leader in public broadcasting. It's an honor to be invited in your name, Jim. And I too have a chance to thank Mr. Russell Smith for his sponsorship of this lecture. I have a special reason for doing so, which Jeff gave away. But I'm honored to meet him here today. I know how long Mr. Smith and his late brother Eldon Smith have been supporters of public broadcasting and its mission back to the creation and building of KCET in the 1960s. So how do I know all this? Well, as they say in the business, I have my sources. So let me just show you a short video, just a couple of minutes, of someone very important in my life and work, Mr. Smith's nephew, Eldon Smith's son, Martin Smith.
What's the mission today?
Mission today is a couple things. Now we're trying to get eyes on a river crossing that we think the Taliban are using. The other part is trying to see how aggressive they're going to be, trying to bait them a little bit into being overly aggressive and see if we can catch them in a trap.
Do you expect them to attack you today?
I do.
Roger, we still have about 200 meters till we reach that first compound.
Roger, we got contact already. I need you to move now. Move now.
Well before we expected, the Taliban opened fire.
It's coming from the same position that 2 Charlie got hit at yesterday.
We are pinned down in a spot with little cover.
Hey, use talking guns with that saw to save your ammo.
Last year, Admiral Mullen and a senior CIA official traveled to Islamabad with evidence that the ISI was continuing to support the Taliban. In this case, intercepted communications between ISI officers and militants.
We laid out some very specific areas that we thought needed to be addressed to both the military, the intelligence, and the political leadership. We had a series of meetings.
You laid out the ISI's involvement with the militants that were based inside Pakistan.
We spoke to, clearly, the ISI's relationship with various militant groups that they've had for some time.
How do I understand this? The Defense Intelligence Agency, the CIA, U.S. military, and Afghan intelligence all points to ISI and Pakistani cooperation and support for segments of the Taliban.
I think so.
Are they all lying?
I think it's outdated intelligence. They must be talking of the past. We are cooperating. We will continue to cooperate because we believe safe Afghanistan is safe Pakistan.
You've been frustrated in the past during the Bush administration with how soft the policy was on Pakistan.
Right.
You think that there's a major change in the approach to Pakistan under this administration?
No.
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 In other words, you're still frustrated that the administration is soft on Pakistan.
See, here is the fundamental problem. They say Pakistan is not a helpful country. Let us help them to become helpful. I disagree with that principle.
So how would you do it?
Let's put pressure on them to help.
What kind of pressure?
You cannot incentivize bad behavior, or else this is going to be a vicious circle.
Martin Smith. Martin's been with Frontline since its earliest years. He made his first film for me in 1986. It was called Who's Running This War? It was about the Contra War against Nicaragua. It was also, I believe, the first time that anyone has drawn attention to a mysterious Colonel North who was operating out of a basement in the Reagan White House. What impressed me so much about working on that first film with Marty Smith was not just his skill as a filmmaker, a director who could craft sequences and tell a good story, but his tough-minded reporting. He dug up that story about Oliver North and named names. It would take too long to go over all the films Marty has made for Frontline since. I asked him to count, and he came up with well over 30. It was only recently I pushed him into turning the camera on himself and his questions. Until then, he'd had, like most documentarians, stayed behind the camera. But all along, his natural ability to ask hard, probing questions, his indefatigable curiosity, his genuine courage, has led to some of the most important works we've done at Frontline. Hunting Bin Laden was made 2.5 years before 9/11. It was the film we rebroadcast 2 days after that tragic event. An extraordinary public response. In fact, the morning after, PBS got a call from the White House saying Vice President Cheney wanted a copy. Well, send it right over, they said. There's a car downstairs already, they replied. Those next days in packed screenings on Capitol Hill, we were literally briefing the Congress and the U.S. government on who was Osama bin Laden and what was Al-Qaeda. What an awesome responsibility for journalists. I tell that story not so much about Marty Smith or Lowell Bergman, with whom he worked on that film, as I do about the importance of public broadcasting and the potential impact and influence of our journalism. Over the years, Frontline has been able to bring a focus on serious issues in film after film, and occasionally to do what we always say we want to do, make the beast blink, get the attention of the powerful. That was illustrated most vividly again with Martin Smith, who just this summer, while making Obama's War, was interviewing General Eikenberry, now the U.S. ambassador to Afghanistan. Afterwards, Eikenberry told him a story, that he'd had such difficulty getting Bush and Cheney to pay attention to the problems in Afghanistan that he'd got them to screen Return of the Taliban, Marty Smith's 2006 film on the resurgent Taliban. He said it got their attention in a way that all his PowerPoint presentations couldn't. That evening after the interview, Marty was invited to dinner with a visiting congressional delegation. Sitting on the roof of the embassy with the lights of Kabul around them, Eikenberry introduced Marty Smith to the visitors as the man responsible for the film that, quote, changed U.S. policy in Afghanistan. Now, I've devoted all this time to Marty Smith, and I know he'd be embarrassed. But I'm doing this not because of the family who are here, but because it illustrates how important his work is. And it tells us something much more profound about what it takes to make good journalism. It takes talent and intelligence, it takes a lot of guts and courage to go places, and it takes time. Time. It's the most precious commodity we've been given at Frontline. And Marty and all those other Frontline producers have done this work all these years, and they know more than anyone how valuable that is. What a privilege. It is the investment of time, not just to research, but the time to collect, to parse out the meanings of the interviews, the scenes, the fragments of stock footage, and the time to think and rethink the ideas and their progress through the narrative, and then to re-edit and get it right. This is the most difficult of journalistic crafts, I believe. That's the reason so few places, like the networks, do this anymore. Making a major narrative documentary is an expensive and time-consuming task. It doesn't make economic sense. It only makes journalistic sense. And that's if you believe that in an increasingly complex world, someone needs to pick through the mass of information that comes flooding at us day and night and choose a path through it. A great narrative documentary is a bright line, an intellectual journey that helps us make sense of the world around us and the challenges our intellects. That's it. Intelligence. It is and has to be our watchword. If we can't say that the idea, the story, the film we're working on is intelligent, then we shouldn't be doing it. In fact, we shouldn't be given the means to do it. Someone should take away the money they give us to produce these films. There's only one way to justify the public money that comes to Frontline, and it's been considerable over the years. An extraordinary commitment by public broadcasting to this series and to this idea, and that's if we keep making something that's smart and excellent. That's a test we should be applying to everything we do in public broadcasting. Excellence. Sadly, we often fail at that. There's really too much second-rate work that gets by. If it finds funding, it often gets broadcast. That's the most profound challenge to public broadcasting, I believe, that while we argue for increased funding, for more accessibility, for new programs and innovative applications in the multi-platform world, we have to consider the decision makers, the programmers and the gatekeepers, the leadership of this enterprise. They have to demand excellence. Frankly, they don't deserve more money until they do. Of course, there's some smart and dedicated people who want excellence, but it's often risky stuff, and many more are in positions where they've learned to protect their flanks, look over their shoulders at boards, university presidents, to noisy station members or member stations, and choose the easy way. Take the safe programming, the anodyne, the familiar. It's educational, isn't it? Sometimes the problem lies simply in the way in which they see their jobs. Is it to bring the best and smartest and most provocative programming we can find or afford, or is that just too complicated and subjective a quest? Or maybe it's just easier to try to get an audience at any price. Not long ago, I visited a station as a favor to speak to their major donors. I was picked up at the airport by the program director, a nice and enthusiastic lady who'd worked at the station for 25 years. She was a big supporter of Frontline, she said, programmed it right next to Nova at 9 p.m. But she said she doesn't program those other documentary programs after Frontline, POV, Independent Lens, because, well, they sometimes have odd lengths and that disturbs the scheduling of the Britcoms that she has on afterwards. Besides, they generally cause a lot of phone calls from unhappy viewers who don't like the politics. So out they go, off to the alternative channel where, quote, everyone who wants them can find them. Oh, and Charlie Rose is on at 6 a.m. The station does no local news. It does produce pledge programming. This is perhaps not as disturbing as the station I spoke at last year for their annual fundraising dinner in their studio. I stood at a lectern against a backdrop covered in logos for Nova and Masterpiece Theatre and Nature and Frontline. I told them why this endeavor is important, how valuable their support for the station is and for Frontline, and urged them to keep donating. Then I went back to my hotel, and lying in bed I was scrolling through the channels when I came across a shopping channel with a dubious doctor selling nutritional supplements. I was interested in a perversely fascinated way. He promised all kinds of remedies, including, and I'm not exaggerating here, results for cancer sufferers. And then the shot changed to a woman with him who said that if you bought these supplements, you'd be making a donation to, yes, the public television station I just left. And there in the wide shot was the backdrop I'd stood before that evening. Nova, Nature, Frontline. This is our deepest embarrassment as public broadcasters. I have heard the arguments, I understand the imperatives, but to think that hucksters aside, we spend more of our energy and on-air promotional time pushing programs that have nothing to do with our mission is shameful. I won't get into a rant about pledge. You know it. We've all complained about it for years. It's the curse of public broadcasting, especially public television, and it doesn't seem like a subject worth analyzing for an erudite audience at a journalism school. Yet it goes to the heart of the issue about funding. Is this an endeavor that keeps an important station on the air for the people of the community, or has this station become a vehicle for raising money for its own existence? And what's inside the bricks and mortar, the fancy new buildings we've raised with so many capital campaigns? I wish I could be more hopeful about them being places that encourage new young producers to try out their talents and bring some verve and risk to the local programming. I walked through a newly converted digital production facility in a Midwestern city with a big new university nearby. The public station was showing it off, new editing rooms and studios, and as I walked around with the head of production, I started to enthuse about all the young people with new cameras, editing on their laptops, who could be brought in here and encouraged, given a chance to show their work, get a little extra polish, perhaps reveal a real talent amongst them, as there always is. Perhaps a late-night broadcast, a chance to get their work on the air. What about connecting with some bloggers, some local online journalists, by giving them a space too? He looked at me with distrust, didn't seem to know what to say, and the thoughts went nowhere. So I went off to greet the major donors in the company of Big Bird and Oscar the Grouch, to whom I offered the job of hosting Frontline. Once upon a time, I walked into a place like that. I was a young, enthusiastic producer and journalist. It was 1973. I walked into a brand new public television station in Huntington Beach, California, KOCE. I'd made my way out of South Africa, where as a young journalist I tried my hand at making documentaries. I had to teach myself, mostly because there was no television in South Africa then. The government didn't allow it in until 1976. And I had to figure out the grammar and syntax of this strange new medium. Film, of course, was expensive. The cost of a 10-minute roll of 16mm film meant that if you had to think hard before you turned the camera on, it made me appreciate the preciousness of that act, that what you did had to count, that it was worth talking about what you were trying to say, and that it was all about collaboration. Finding the best people to work with was the best guarantee that I'd not somehow waste that roll of film. Somehow I managed to put together a couple of films about apartheid, and I was invited to screen one of them for the BBC. I sold my motorbike, bought a one-way ticket, and found myself re-editing it in London at the BBC. I learned a lot, was offered a job, but thought the place was too wet and full of Brits. So one night, in a noisy BBC pub with the smell of damp wool and stale beer, I announced, "I think I'll go to California." And then really, somebody said, and I fled. KOCE was where I learned my craft. I started as a volunteer, but soon began shooting and editing stories for the local political news program. Because there was federal education money at the time for, quote, how quaint, distance learning programs, a few of us young filmmakers were able to take chances, drive all over California in a station wagon to make documentaries about poverty and racism and the environment. Our bosses didn't really know what we were doing, but it was our education. I persuaded the BBC to do a co-production, took my fellow cameraman from KOCE to Alabama and made a film on the 20th anniversary of Brown versus Board of Education, Deep South, Deep North. I got to fly Rosa Parks from Detroit to Montgomery to ride a bus for my film. It was a wonderful, heady time for a young man, a time for public television when we were all inventing ourselves. And then in 1977, I was invited to go to WGBH in Boston. My boss, Peter McGee, who would become my mentor, took a chance on me. He offered this young itinerant filmmaker journalist the job of executive producer of an international documentary series, World. What I found at WGBH was an extraordinary culture of inquiry, a place which celebrated ideas. It was a place that valued debate in programs like The Advocates and took on tough subjects like Vietnam, a television history. That respect for a wide range of opinion undergirded the journalism I found there. It was also a place that respected conclusions honestly come by. Journalism has an obligation to fairness, but when it uncovers uncomfortable truths, it has an obligation to publish without fear or favor. In 1980, I wrote and produced a program called Death of a Princess, which made very serious charges against a senior member of the Saudi royal family. In effect, it accused the king's elder brother of murder. It caused an uproar at the time, led to the breaking of diplomatic relations between Saudi Arabia and Great Britain. There was a serious threat of similar action here in the United States. There's a time of oil shortages, and the State Department and members of the Congress leaned very heavily on PBS to cancel the broadcast. At WGBH, my management was faced with their own pressures. The major underwriter for Masterpiece Theatre was Mobil Oil, which took out ads in the New York Times protesting the program. Not only, I remember the day I sat in an office with Henry Beckton and Peter McGee, and they looked at me and said, "Are we all right?" And I said, "We're okay. We're all right in the journalism." And Henry said, "Well then, we've rented space on the transponder of the satellite, and if PBS decides not to go with this, we'll put it up out of Boston and hand it to anybody who wants to take it." That's the time I knew I was working in the right place. As Peter McGee later said, It put a chock behind the wheel of public television. It proved the system could withstand great political pressure, and in many ways laid the ground for Frontline. It gave me great faith in the people I worked for. Soon afterwards, I came to a meeting at the Corporation for Public Broadcasting looking for funding for another season, a short season of World. Louis Friedman, then the chief programming officer at CPB, challenged me to think about something bigger. He said, what about domestic programs as well as international? I said, well, sure. And he said, how many? I said, how many? And he said, 26 weeks. And I sat and worked out a budget on the back of an envelope over a sandwich at lunch. And in one stroke, Louis Friedman, with the concurrence of the board, made a 3-year commitment to start a new documentary strand, just as he'd done for drama and children's programming. That was the beginning of Frontline. It was an extraordinary act by CPB, a bold gesture of trust that, given the time and resources, with people of talent, we could make something worthy of the public mission. And that's what we've tried to do ever since. Of all those documentaries, there was one documentary that made a real difference in the way we work. It was back in the early years, way back, of the World Wide Web, 1995. Remember then? Frontline was about to broadcast a film about the tragic confrontation in Waco. We got hold of tape recordings of the secret negotiations between the FBI and the Branch Davidians. We could only use part of them in the documentary, a few minutes at most. We were sitting around the office and I was asking if we could make some radio out of them, or when someone, we can't remember who, we think it was the intern, said, you can put them on the web. It was nonplussed. We said, really? What else can we put up there? Well, could we put the interviews up? Yeah, sure. Documents? I said, the whole film? They said, well, we can't do that. I said, yet? They said, yet. Well, short of that, we did the rest of it. And as best we know, that Frontline website, Waco, The Inside Story, was the first deep content editorial website in history. We did it the next week and the week after. And not only in publishing all those interviews and documents, we did something very special. We made our journalism transparent. Anyone could hold our documentary up against the primary materials, test our conclusions. It was a profound act, a big bang moment, a real change in the contract between the viewer and the producer. Think about what we did before. All those months of work were directed into 1 hour, one night at 9 o'clock. We threw it up in the air, some of it hit the satellite and bounced back, and the rest went to Mars. It slipped through your fingers, television. It was ephemeral. You hoped somebody tuned in at the right time. Now, for the first time, serious work on television could have the weight of permanence. That has great implications. You're doing it for the long view, and for the viewer to find whenever he or she wants. We were early in that game too. By 2000, Frontline was streaming its first video. We built our own video player for the website and then added timed embedded links to other materials. We took the bright line of the documentary narrative and reconnected it to its context. That's the goal now, that when a Frontline film travels out, away from the website, syndicated to whoever wants to feature it, it'll carry those links, that intellectual armature. Today, a program like Bush's War has had over 6 million video views. Obama's War has had almost 2 million just weeks after broadcast. What started with our Waco film has become something much bigger. Recently, I spoke at a breakfast at my local Rotary Club. Afterwards, the pastor of the Old North Church, the Congregational Church in Marblehead, Massachusetts, came up to me. He told me that he'd been contacted recently by an old college friend who he'd not heard from in years. Apparently, his friend had been in the ATF, the Alcohol, Tobacco and Firearms, and he wanted to talk to the pastor. As it turned out, the former ATF agent was haunted by guilt. He'd shot and killed one of the Branch Davidians in the first confrontation at Waco. The pastor told me that in order to call him back and counsel him, he'd gone to the web, and the most useful place he'd found to help understand what had happened to his friend was the Frontline website, our very first. That's our original long tail, its lasting value. It's also the measure of our impact, as important as changing public policy, as influential as one viewer to whom our work made a difference. Today we're engaged in a new challenging set of online projects with our colleagues at some of the non-profit investigative centers. We're trying to invent some of the new grammar for the new media. At ProPublica, we have a producer in their newsroom shooting and editing and reporting together with one of their crack reporters. We're investigating a series of unsolved killings in New Orleans in the aftermath of Hurricane Katrina, from the actions of violent white militia to the failure of local law enforcement to protect African Americans in the wake of the storm. We're creating an investigative website that will continually update developments in the reporting of those homicides. Now we've added the New Orleans Times-Picayune as another reporting partner in the story. Soon we'll start posting photographs, video, and the print stories, and solicit help from the public to verify and add information to the storytelling and to the reporting. Eventually, the joint investigation will emerge as a full broadcast story for Frontline, and then its life will continue online. As we move more and more into this new platform, the symbiotic relationship between our reporting and our broadcast will keep being in tension. Each feeds the other and drives audience. Where we can distinguish ourselves from most of the rest of the online journalistic endeavors is not just our broadcast megaphone, which gives us a very powerful competitive edge, but the commitment to keep making high-quality work. The demand has to be keep doing it better, keep the bar high. That bright line of narrative has to be vivid enough to keep attracting and holding an audience increasingly distracted. That's our challenge. And don't do anything that doesn't rely on intelligence and excellence. I have one caution about our new public broadcasting ventures on the web. I am particularly concerned about a threat to our essential public identity. This is already happening. They're called sponsorships, but they're essentially commercials all over public broadcasting websites, local and national radio and television. I've argued strenuously that we are threatening our special status as non-commercial media. I'm told that in surveys the public doesn't notice them and is not offended. No wonder. We all swim in a sea of commercialism, and that's precisely why we need to keep ourselves clean of it. One day, I'm afraid that when most of our work is experienced on the web, we will wake up and the public will say, we're no different from the rest of them. Why should we give you our membership money? And why should the government give you our tax dollars? Soon, I'm told, PBS will be generating ads to fill the banners and boxes we are being instructed to design into our website at Frontline. When I object, I'm told that it's because PBS is under financial pressures from the stations who don't want to pay for all of their web efforts. So to pay for the pipes, we will take ads. I don't get it. Setting aside the real question whether these ads will ever generate enough revenue, do we want to sell our birthright so cheaply? Once we built a satellite delivery system for broadcast. Now we should have all the bandwidth we need to build the new ideas we have to develop to thrive in the future. That's the necessary investment in the future. I hope there's a place for Frontline in that future, that it will be able to continue to do what it does best, that we can adapt and grow. But I also believe that can only happen if we start to think seriously about the reinvention of public broadcasting into public media. A lot of ways in which that could happen, and there are proposals floating around, but I think at their heart they should be arguing that the best hope for this whole system is to build it around a mission for journalism. Radio is already doing that in many ways, television has to get behind it. That means a doubling down on the sorts of ideas that have become current, the joining of new local online journalism entities with public broadcasters. What better way to embrace journalism but to bring it inside? Offer space in our buildings, new and old, the ones I walked through, and maybe if we start recruiting a new media generation, in my mind, they're a lot like a group of 20-somethings I remember at KOCE in the 1970s, with their great new HD cameras, their laptop editing, and their web savvy. Maybe we'll start the act of reinvention. Open up those studios and let's begin practicing journalism. It is, I believe, our salvation for this system, but it has to happen at the local station. It will take the bravest and most adventurous to do this, taking aim at City Hall, State Capitol, and powerful financial interests will take courage and leadership, the kinds of editorial protections I was given at WGBH. But it's not that hard. Hire a good editor, adopt a code of journalistic practices, and protect the firewall. All it needs is a couple of dozen stations in regions around the country to do that, for public broadcasters to become the heart of the public media transformation that is coming. And as Len Downey suggested recently in a report for Columbia University's Graduate School of Journalism, those stations should be rewarded with funding, encouraged by CPB and the public financing system to do just that, live up to a public interest obligation. Otherwise, they will and should be irrelevant. If we set that local transformation as a goal, then we can begin imagining a bigger idea. What we need most in public television is great journalism, much more of it. I believe that if we claim this new digital platform, this third space between radio and television, if we put out the call and with a relatively modest investment, hire and contract some of the best journalists around, they're out there, we could suddenly become a major player on the national stage. We would get a lot of attention. And for every grizzled newspaper star reporter, hire 3 young reporters on the same beat. They understand the daily demands, the drumbeat of reporting in the online world, set up an apprenticeship model. Of course, you can aggregate and curate, everybody's doing that, but most importantly, start doing enterprise reporting. Partner with the other new public media enterprises looking for publication, like the non-profit investigative units. And when you add the existing assets of public radio and television, programs like Frontline and the News Hour, as well as public radio, the megaphones of broadcast, you can see the outlines of a new powerful journalistic enterprise. It can have the sort of gravitational weight that will rearrange the universe of public media. And it has a feedback loop. We at Frontline will be responsive to that journalism, as will the News Hour and other programs, and new ideas will come out of that dialogue. We can change the ecology of our broadcast schedule. Compared to any other new media startup, this has an enormous asset. That network of local stations, community connections, and their new journalistic calling. The stations will be getting a new source of programming for their communities. The network has bureaus, and the best of those stories become a part of the national conversation. And here's where we are different from most new media journalism startups. This has a business plan that works. It's been proven. People give to public broadcasting in ways that few other institutions can match. Why is that? I believe it's because it's a civic trust. I believe it's because the government says it is and puts tax dollars down to prove it. That's why we, in turn, give to it. That's a contract unique to public broadcasting. It is what will distinguish this idea. If you add in philanthropy, you have an existing membership-driven, publicly supported, non-profit model for enterprise journalism. But here's what really distinguishes it. We have a record of fairness. At a time when many media companies are taking a partisan stance, when interest groups are practicing their own versions of journalism, when bloggers and HuffPosts publish from their political perspectives, there has to be a place for fairness, for the honest broker. That's our real birthright as public interest broadcasters and journalists. It's becoming an old-fashioned idea, but I deeply believe it will become increasingly valuable. And it's the people who value fairness and honesty who will support it financially and politically. And that's important because this reinvention is a political challenge of the highest order. At the heart of this big idea is more public funding. It will require the attention of Congress and the administration, the setting aside of egos and unprecedented partnerships. But it's essential for our survival and the important idea that has been public broadcasting. After running Frontline for over 25 years, I want its future to be part of a public media enterprise that's bigger and better. I want us to work with people who set the bar high, who value intelligence and curiosity, who want to produce smart and literate journalism. And I want to keep supporting Marty Smith in his extraordinary work. More than anything, I want to find a new generation of reporters and producers like him. If we invest in anything in this system, it should be in new, young people who want to do this work. We're willing to pass on what we know. What we have to help create is the place that will give them the opportunities we've had. Thank you for listening, for the honor of being here. It's been a privilege. Jeff has invited me to answer some questions, so I'm happy to defend whatever I said.
David, you raised the question of commercialism. Do you think that there is a way for government funding to help us avoid this creeping non-differentiation between public broadcasting and commercials everywhere, as opposed to the Discovery channels and the other, channels that are filled with commercials?
Well, I think non-commercialism is at the heart of our identity. I think that clearly people are doing it for desperate reasons. I'm not sure what the revenue streams look like, but as far as I hear, they're substantial. And I think in the face of all of the very aggressive commercial advertising that's out there on the web and will be there, I don't think that we could really match much of it. So I think I don't know. We've always going to be, there is a continuing reason for lots of places to need to keep desperately looking for money. I think they're going to have to look very hard at their own internal structures to say, where are the real cuts to come in all of this, at the same time that there has to be a redoubled effort to go right at the major appropriation. I mean, there are groups like Free Press and others who are really laying down the groundwork for, I think, a major assault, if you will, on this administration and on and people in this administration to say, let's really, for the first time, rise to put the right sort of funding in place and guarantee it long term and insulate it from political pressures. And I think that is coming, and I think that will be a really big change. I think the fear for a lot of public broadcasters is that there's so many public media entities out there, is that the pool of money out there is going to get divided out amongst it, and they're going to get shortchanged. I think that's why they have to aggressively come in and argue for their positions as part of the new media platform. And really, I think journalism is, in fact, the key to that. That we have, and let me just be very clear, I don't believe that we shouldn't still be doing music and entertainment and all of the great and terrific arts and culture programming we should be doing. By the way, reporting on arts and culture and history and science is all part of journalism, and it's part of any great news organization. So, but it's turning ourselves around, and I think the challenge lies really in the enterprise of the people who need to take leadership in this system. And that has to have that is perhaps the most challenging part of there's an awful lot of people who are dug into their positions in public broadcasting. Just yell out. I'm happy to.
Thank you very much. It's wonderful and inspiring. I have a question with the recent studies that have come out around more viewership of television. Actually, people are actually watching more television.
Right.
So it seems like one of the issues that is not really touched upon in much of the discourse about this is the cultivation of an appreciation for narrative documentaries or narratives that take time to unfold. And I was wondering if you could address.
Oh, it's such a hard one. We every now and then you look down at the ground and think really hard and say, is this the last gasp of the narrative documentary? As it fragments onto the web, as it breaks into these chapters that we create on the web for people to watch and watch more easily. I fear deeply for that. I think the challenge has to be that you have to do them really, really well. That if you're going to do a sort of passing documentary that's sort of earnest about a subject that you should be watching, then I think you're probably going to lose people. I think if you can make something that's riveting, that is a good story, a good tale, that has all the power of a great morality play, then you get people to watch. Then you get it handed around. Then it becomes an artifact, especially as it becomes embeddable and as you can pick it up and drop it over into other places where people can find it in the blogosphere, where it can be seen very easily, and when it becomes very easy to download it right into your iPhone and to sit next time you're on the train or in the plane and sit down quietly and watch it because you saw enough of it to say, I really want to watch the rest of it. And I think there's a very particular kind of connection to the audience, which I think is really important. It goes right. We become closer to a relationship to serious works that people have to important books. We carry them around with us and we carry them into our homes, but it just means that we have to set the bar high and do really good job of it.
David?
This is the last question. Sorry, yes.
I hate to be the last one. Have I got this one?
Yeah, great.
This is not a question. I just have to say, I don't think I've been inspired as much about the possibilities in public media for some time as I have with you today. I do think the timing of what you're saying is absolutely something we should take hold on. I think what you're saying is the way to get people to come together to give the appropriate money. And I don't think I've heard anybody say it better than you said it today. It makes me want to do something about it.
Good,
so
we'll do.
We got to give a word to the dean. He has a
Yes.
follow up on Bryce's comments and say, what should we?
What can we do to be helpful to you? What can journalism and communication schools do? And certainly here at the Annenberg School, because we want to follow up on Louise's comment and say, of the myriad of things we could do, what would be most helpful to achieve the vision that you've described?
Well, we have a model for it set up at Berkeley, at the Graduate School of Journalism at UC Berkeley. And the reason really is that Lowell Bergman and his wife Sharon Tiller, who live in Berkeley, worked with Frontline. And the background to this is that some years ago, a good 9 years ago, Orville Schell, then the dean of the journalism school, was at Davos. And he met a terrific man who was the senior vice president of corporate communications for a large European company called ABB, the kind of Bechtel of Europe. And Bjorn Edlund is an amazing man. Apart from being a wonderful blues harmonica player, he also happens to be a former Reuters journalist. And Bjorn was talking to Orville and said, you have all these students and international students, graduate students, why don't you? He had just been on the video bridge with George Soros to Brazil, to sort of Davos to Brazil when they were sort of defending the divide. And Bjorn said, why don't we get your students to make a film about globalization? And so Orville came to me and said, gee, isn't it exciting we can get the students to make a 2-hour film on globalization? I said, bad idea. The G word. We don't want to. I said, what do we take? Let's talk to Bjorn. How much money has he got? And it turned out to be about £1 million Swiss francs. And I said, so I flew. I literally flew in and had a lunch in Zurich and flew back. And we extracted a 3-year commitment out of him. And I said, if you give us the money, we'll match it. And so we matched the money together, and we had a pool of money with some foundations. And what we set out to do was do something called Frontline World. And Frontline World has been our experiment, using younger producers, reporters, many of them grads from the Berkeley School, who came out of a very good training program that John Elst did at Berkeley. And we have, over the years, mutated that from not a broadcast program, but actually to a website. There are over 200 videos there. There's dispatches. There's all kinds of projects that are on the website. And the best of them migrate onto television and an occasional special on PBS. We're actually wanting to expand that idea because this new generation of really terrific people, there's 100 odd of them that have gone through that program. Many of them now work in the New York Times, the LA Times, and other places as video journalists. That relationship between the investigative journalism program that Lowell runs, those students, and that little shop that we set up with a little bit of financing and an edit room, we've now replicated at AU. So that Chuck Lewis, who started the Center for Public Integrity, has now started something called the Investigative Reporting Workshop. So when one of my producers was looking to rent himself office space in Washington, I said, no, let's go to AU and see if we can't extract something out of them. So we extracted $150,000, which they've spent to create a space with editing rooms. So Rick Young, my producer, and his team sit in an office with Chuck Lewis at AU, doing a film about regional airlines and why you shouldn't fly the damn things. Anyway, but the students are doing investigative work for the project. And it begins to, and I was just talking to Bill Busenberg at the Center for Public Integrity, we look at the opportunity now for CPI to come in and maybe help, we can find some money together to pay for another producer in that office. We begin to create a kind of nexus that's attached to the journalism school, the School of Communication, and yet also has a professional group of people. It's housing some professionals who are working. We started Frontline World because we literally had an office under the staircase at the Berkeley School doing frontlines. The students could come in, get a look inside the process, do some, slave labor work for, kind of work study wages, but many of them had a wonderful time. Just logging tapes, by the way, is a great way to learn about how documentaries are made. It's late night work, but you find out a lot about what goes on. You get inside and under the machinery of making these. That's a long-winded story about a kind of an apprenticeship system which is out there to be done. First of all, that's one layer of it, and I think on top of that, you could keep constructing levels of relationships between, and I think where the energies lie, they lie in the academic community or in practical hands-on schools like this, in looking to see how you set up those kinds of partnerships, and of course, building on top of those, we've had some success actually in attracting money that would not have come otherwise, but comes because, especially from larger donors who come because they see a way in which their work has a real practical application and where it gets into something that actually goes on the air and has an impact. So that's one off-the-cuff idea.
That was wonderful, it was inspiring, and we'll keep the conversation going, and some of us are leaving here looking for somebody who's a blues harmonica player. But But we have one more piece of the afternoon, a very special presentation by a very special man who, as I mentioned earlier, member of the Annenberg School Board of Counselors, member of the USC Board, and now member of the Corporation for Public Broadcasting Board, Bruce Raymer.
Thank you, Jeff. He is easily satisfied with the very best. Now, Winston Churchill said that, but he was obviously had in mind Ernie Wilson. Ernie is, and I dare say everybody in this room knows it, is a true visionary, to the point where some of us describe him as having audacity of vision. Now, listening to David made it very clear, and most of us are all too aware of this, that this nation has never had a greater need for an informed public. And here we are in the revolution in communication and communication technology, some of which David not only referred to, but evidently presided at the birthing. And that requires leadership in communication and in journalism and public media. Ernie is that person. Ernie has it all and does it all. If he were a football player, I think he would be a renowned triple threat quarterback. On behalf of the Board of Trustees of this university, which I am very proud to be representing at this moment, I want to give our congratulations to you, Ernie. Perhaps more accurately, congratulations to the Corporation for Public Broadcasting for getting you as its chair. Because, again, your vision, your leadership, your dedication, your passion, your commitment to what this is all about, both here at the Annenberg School and at the Corporation. You are the exemplar of it. And let me just give you, if I may, a token of appreciation, which I'm a little hesitant to give you because there's no telling what you'll do with it. But it is a gavel, and I know you will bang both heads and desks with this. Ernie, congratulations. See, this is communication.
Thank you, Bruce. Congratulations, Ernie. Thank you once again to David Fanning. And now we're going to have a reception. So please, let's keep that conversation that David so brilliantly started going, and let's continue it going with the chair of the CPB board and with such a wonderful faculty and student body. Thank you,
Deborah's my lead team. We work as a team.
Yeah.